I don't think it's particularly controversial to say that Vite's one of the most important tools for web dev nowadays. I don't like building projects without Vite as one of the core dependencies. It just makes building so much easier and more reliable, and most importantly, fast. Vite took over for a reason, and it's mostly just because it's good. It's a really reliable primitive that we can build on top of, and the ecosystem that's been built around it through the VoidZero team is incredible. Things like Vitetest, Rolldown, OXC, Vite Plus as of recent, and more have made the Vite ecosystem so compelling. In fact, it's become so compelling that another big company noticed. Cloudflare is now the owners of VoidZero, the company that Evan Yu, the creator of Vue and Vite, formed to maintain all of these projects. And my guess is that their plan is to build a new cloud. I've been keeping an eye on the relationship between VoidZero and Cloudflare for a while. I think this acquisition makes a ton of sense. But in order for it to make sense, we need to think far beyond what Vite itself is as a bundler and layer for building apps, and think more about how agents are building things for the future and what the cloud will look like in a world where we're not the ones configuring it ourselves. This also means VoidZero is suddenly a much more compelling competitor to some of the fun things I've been building with my cloud recently, which also helps give me an interesting perspective on this whole change. I'm going to do my best to lay out what the future looks like, not just for VoidZero and Cloudflare, but for building with agents on the cloud as a whole. But if I just lost to Cloudflare, I'm going to need to make money somehow, and we're going to start with today's sponsor. By now, we've all seen how much better AI gets when it's given the right skills. With the context it needs, most AI can do most things. It's really cool and powerful, which is why it's so annoying that computer use is as bad as it is. Tell an agent to write a code base and build a new cloud, it can absolutely do that. Believe me, I've done it now. But when you tell an agent to go, like navigate a website and fill out a form for you, you can never quite find things. I actually watched a browser use agent unable to fill out a form on Google yesterday because it couldn't find the email input box because the placeholder text was too light and it didn't notice it. It's actually insane how bad those things are unless you use today's sponsor, BrowserBase. Specifically, their new CLI for AI agents that makes it easier for them to browse. I can't believe they snagged the Browse NPM package for this, but they did, and I think it deserves it because the things it does are unbelievable. They have an open web catalog of skills that you can trivially add for agents to be able to use, like Browse Skills Add, alltrails.com, recreation.gov, ramp.com, and all these other sites. Once the skills are added, all of a sudden your agents will be way better at navigating those sites. You can just tell Claude to do a task that requires all of them, like planning a road trip to Utah with EV charging stops and campsites for each night. Book and reimburse on Ramp. There you go. Crazy task that would normally require a person to hop between a ton of different things, and now an agent can do it in one shot. And if you want to get a little more nitty-gritty with the browser automation stuff, they have that too. The CLI gives your agents the ability to do all the things they need on the web pages themselves, from clicking, typing, selecting, pressing, scrolling, using the mouse, even screenshotting so the agent can see the results, and more importantly, you can too. And if you're the type that needs to be in the network logs, believe me, I've had to be in them like 3 times during this filming session. Having your agent able to navigate them and actually get data from those logs is so useful. And most importantly, the reason that BrowserBase made this, when you're ready to put that browser instance in the cloud, they have you covered. You can create a Chromium session for direct control, or you can just search for things or fetch things directly from given URLs. They have it all figured out. Give your agents the power of the whole web at soydev.link/browserbase. In order to understand the VoidZero Vite Cloudflare merger, we first need to understand a bit more about VoidZero and the direction it was going in. While VoidZero was very well regarded for tools like OXC, Vite, and everything around it, their goals were much further down the line. Their hope was to build their new platform, Void, as the place to deploy all the apps that you build with things like Vite. They wanted it to be way easier to deploy an app. And I very much sympathize with this goal. I have a question for y'all. How many apps do you have sitting on your computer that are mostly working, like they work fine on your machine, that you just haven't deployed because that part takes too much effort? Let me know, chat. So the Void employee says 0 because they're all on Void. So many, 6 or 7. All my projects so far, 22. You don't want to know, at least 10, like 10. Yeah, I get it. In a very, very general sense, for me, building a side project used to take like 40 to 100 hours to like spin it up and get it working how I wanted. Things like Marker Thing, the service that I built for tracking all of my markers when I'm streaming to make it easier to grab the clips from the stream and turn those into videos. This took me 30 to 40 hours to build and get working how I wanted it to. And I did that 5 years ago, and it's worked perfectly every time we stream since. Super useful tool. Building it probably took 30 or 40 hours. Deploying it probably took 2 or 3. Like getting the cloud set up, getting it plugged into Vercel properly, setting up the database, setting up the auth layer with Clerk, none of it was hard. There was just a lot of those pieces. It didn't feel too bad because it was like less than a tenth or so of the time. But this was in an era before AI could write all the code. Now, building has become way easier. This lines up with my experience in a lot of projects now, where actually building it and getting the code working how I want only takes a couple minutes, 30 or so at best. And then deploying still takes the same 3+ hours. Previously, that was acceptable because it was less than 10% of the time was spent doing the actual deployment stuff. Now it's a lot less acceptable because the deploying feels so much worse when everything else was way quicker to do. And that's why the Void platform existed. It was the goal of the team to build the fastest way to deploy your apps on real infrastructure. So once you build something with Vite, you can run a simple command and get it out there for anyone to use. You install the Void plugin, you add this as a plugin in your Vite config, and now you can run Void deploy, and your app is now live. If you've been around for a bit, this might seem a little familiar. With most stacks, your app and its platform do not talk to each other directly. You end up stitching them together with config files, environment setup, resource provisioning, and deployment scripts. Also, a lot of time in weird dashboards. Once the app is live, caching, scaling, and limits often live in separate control planes as well. Void closes the gap. It connects your app directly to the platform through Vite. You import the DB from void/db, and now you have a database in local dev as well as in the matching production resources on deployment. The same idea applies for KV, storage, queues, and AI. In most cases, the code already describes what the platform needs to provision. I absolutely agree with this mindset here. The code should be enough to tell the infrastructure what it needs to provision. And the fact that it isn't is insane, and it's time to do this right. And it seems like people are confused about the 3-hour thing I'm saying here. I'm not saying that I've set up the deployment system and then I hit deploy and it takes 3 hours to do. If you think that's what I'm saying, I have questions about how good you are at listening. Regardless, the thing I'm trying to say here is when you start a new project, getting it built and working is easier than ever thanks to AI. Getting it deployed has not gotten easier thanks to AI. Once you're building with all the tools AI likes, and it loves things like Convex and Vercel, getting all of those parts linked together can take up to 3 hours to set up. Not that once you hit go, it takes 3 hours to deploy. Come on, guys. Let's be realistic here. But that's what Void is trying to solve as well. They want the code to describe all the things that are needed so that you don't have to go set up Terraform and configure a bunch of AWS dashboards and do all those pieces. And I think this is the right way to go. There were some interesting choices that the Void team made, though, largely around how they integrate standards and what clouds they were building on top of. For example, when you define things for your database, you do it through your drizzle schema, which defines database types. And when you deploy Void, it deploys to Cloudflare workers. Your server code runs at the edge close to users and scales without extra platform work on your side. I understand why they did this. This makes a lot of sense, especially for people who already have workers set up or do it through Void. The worker platform scales great for these types of workloads. It does have a lot of catches as well, and we'll certainly talk about those, but I do think it was the right decision for Void to build this way, especially now this acquisition has went through. It's wild to think Evan Yu, the creator of Vue, is now an employee at Cloudflare, but it does make sense. VoidZero, the company behind Vite, Vitest, Rolldown, OXC, and Vite Plus, is joining Cloudflare. As part of the change, all team members of VoidZero are joining Cloudflare too. This is really good. This isn't like a traditional acqui-hire. This is the business being folded in. Before saying anything else, we want to make the most important thing clear. Vite, Vitest, Rolldown, OXC, and Vite Plus will all stay open source, vendor agnostic, and community driven. Nothing about that changes. Cloudflare's mission is to help build a better internet. And a better internet is an open internet. Developers need choice, frameworks need a neutral foundation, and applications need to be portable. It is not reasonable to expect the entire web ecosystem to build around a single vendor. The most important tools and frameworks are portable by design. I want to talk about this for a sec before we keep reading, because I have a hot take. Every Cloudflare app is more tailored to Cloudflare than Next.js apps are tailored to Vercel. I already can see the comment section from this. For some reason, whenever I say anything nice about Vercel in contrast to Cloudflare, I get called a lot of homophobic slurs. So whoever's doing that in the comment section now, know that I see you and that nobody else does because I've already hidden you from the channel. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make here with this bold statement is that Next.js apps don't have any platform-specific code in them. Next.js apps have Next.js code and TypeScript code in them. Cloudflare apps need some configuration that is Cloudflare-specific. I don't think I've ever had success deploying on Cloudflare without at least one annoying YAML file describing a bunch of bullshit, as well as running something like Wrangler to pull everything together. When I'm building on Cloudflare, I'm not running the Vite dev command. I'm running the Wrangler dev command. When I am adding features to my apps on Workers, I'm not doing it just by updating the code. I'm doing it by updating the configuration that is specific to Cloudflare. This is one of the biggest weaknesses for Cloudflare, in my opinion. When I was trying to port T3 chat over to Cloudflare last year, just for the differences in compute costs, before Vercel had Fluid, by the way, when I was working on that port, I had to spend so much time simply trying to get an app that would serve static content by default for all routes, except for the ones that are being served through the API. So I could have one project and one instance of a worker, as well as the static asset host from Cloudflare sites. So everything would just be this one repo deployed in one simple way to Cloudflare. I had to go through like 15 layers of bullshit hacks and multiple calls with my friends at Cloudflare to figure out how to work around all the bullshit. There ended up being like 3 overrides that conflicted with each other that I had to stack on top of each other just to get a basic Vite React app that was serving Hano endpoints for the /API routes and serving an actual JavaScript bundle and HTML page for the rest. It was so bad that Cloudflare actually went out and built better templates to showcase how to do this, because it was impossible to get right at the time without a lot of work and effort and getting through docs that were contradicting with each other. You know how I do this on Vercel? npx create next app. I go to Vercel, I click the GitHub repo, and now it's on Vercel. Cloudflare's infrastructure is better in so many ways. The problem with Cloudflare was never the capabilities of the infra. Okay, there's some issue there with like not having proper node support because they're running in isolates, but it's not that big a deal for a lot of workloads. The biggest problem I and many others have had with Cloudflare is that it is a different thing to get deployed on Cloudflare than to build your apps. The gap between I built this thing and it works on my computer and it's now running on Cloudflare is far too big. It involves you basically running Cloudflare's infra on your machine through tools like Wrangler. That was bad. And it was so bad that Cloudflare wasn't even building their Terraform configs themselves. We know that because we were using Cloudflare for Upload Thing, and getting the most recent features we needed out of Cloudflare on Upload Thing was impossible for us because their V6 Terraform config had workers working and routes working, but didn't have the new pooling feature we were using working. V7 had the pooling feature as well as durable objects which we wanted to use, but it didn't have routes or workers in it because the Terraform configs and the Terraform plugin was being built by a third-party company called Stainless that I have a lot of grudges with. Speaking of which, a company so incompetent as to provide a Terraform config to Cloudflare that's missing most of Cloudflare's core features clearly doesn't know infrastructure really well, right? Seems like they found a good home with Anthropic. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that Cloudflare is so bad at dev tooling, so egregiously bad at dev tooling, that there was no world in which they could catch up by themselves. They just couldn't. If you don't think Cloudflare's developer experience is shit, you haven't had a good developer experience yet. There's a reason that they poach all these employees from Vercel. There's a reason that they're acquiring companies like Astro and now VoidZero. They know they can't build good DX, but they also know they can build unbelievably powerful infrastructure. And they're looking for the help to get their DX closer to where something like Vercel is or something like Railway is. Because right now, deploying on Cloudflare requires knowing a lot about Cloudflare and doing a lot of Cloudflare-specific bullshit. So going back to Void, what here is Cloudflare specific? This is how you set up Void in order to use the Void ecosystem stuff. And as Alex mentioned in chat earlier, you can deploy on Void without doing any of this if you're just deploying a single-page app. Because again, they're trying to solve the problem of code just being code and deployment just being deployment and not having to do all of this crazy work to rebuild your app and its different bundles and pieces different places just to get stuff working properly on Cloudflare. Void has been building this better abstraction on top of Cloudflare's infrastructure to make it as easy to deploy on as a platform like Vercel is. There is an issue with Vercel, though, and this is why this makes so much sense. This is meant to be the breadth of concerns that a given application development platform would have. On this spectrum, you have stuff like CSS libraries, you have stuff like front-end frameworks, you have stuff like bundlers, you have stuff like CDNs, you have stuff like compute in the sense of like the thing that your code runs on the server side. And then you have things like your database. This is a really rough idea of like the spectrum of things you have to think about as a platform providing full stack application hosting. Companies like Vercel focused in from here to here roughly, and more to here. where Vercel saw issues with people who were trying to build apps with React, and they realized they could make a better bundler, a better framework around React with Next.js, and solve a lot of those problems to make it easier to build apps with React. But then they realized that deploying the apps became the hard part. So they went a little further, introducing CDNs and compute stuff with a company that we might remember. If you're around for the days of Vite, I hope you have good life insurance because we're getting old now, guys. But the goal of Vercel was to extend this range, to take from where React went and expand further to the right until enough was covered that you had a good way to deploy your web framework. There's a problem here, though. And the problem isn't that they're not going far enough into the CSS side. That's probably why they bought ChadCN. The problem's the other direction. What happens when Vercel tries to go further right? Because I don't have a good way to set up auth when I deploy on Vercel, or to set up a database when I deploy on Vercel. I need to go to companies like Clerk or WorkOS to get auth working, right? I need to go to companies like Convex, PlanetScale, or others in order to get the database all set up. And linking all the pieces together quickly becomes the most annoying part when you're building lots of different apps. While Vercel did an incredible job solving from framework down to compute, they stopped there, and their focus was integrations from this point forward. They did try to go further for a little bit, things that I'm sure we all love, like Vercel Postgres, that they have since deprecated. If you're not familiar, Vercel back in the day tried white labeling Neon as a Vercel Postgres. Didn't go great for them, and now they just lean into the marketplace where you can bring in other cloud platforms for your database, for your auth, etc. But Vercel's pretty squarely between this range. Cloudflare is an interesting company because their range is strongest between the CDN and compute. Like, they are really, really good from here to here. But they're starting to expand into databases with platforms like D1, which are admittedly not as strong as other dedicated database offerings, but they work. I know people who use them. They don't love them, but they're fine with them. Cloudflare has extended past where Vercel went by going into things like databases. But they also don't have much the other direction. They don't have bundlers that work great on Cloudflare. You kind of have to finagle your bundler to work right for Cloudflare. They don't have a framework, and I'm sure they have considered building something. Like, there was never really a Rails for Cloudflare, the way that there's Next.js on Vercel. They acquired Hano, the minimal HTTP routing library that's great for spinning up servers. They technically don't own Hano. They employ the creator of Hano, and he works closely with Cloudflare to make Hano work great. So not the same thing, but worth noting. Anyways, but it didn't really solve the problem of building full stack apps. So they made Cloudflare Sites, which kind of worked, but they've since deprecated. Sorry, Cloudflare Pages, not Sites. I need to get the name right. It doesn't really matter because it's dead, but you get the idea. Cloudflare is much further skewed right here, which means that all of the tools have to be customized to work on Cloudflare. Vercel owns enough tooling and enough of the compute layer to make a good experience here. What would it look like to build everything end to end so that you get to own it all? This seems to be what VoidZero is going for now as part of Cloudflare. But I have a lot of insight here because of a project I've been working on for a bit. Y'all might have heard about the T3 Cloud, but that's not what it's going to be called. So now it's time to talk a little bit about Lakebed. Well, it will be time in just a sec because Lakebed might be dead as a result of this acquisition, and I got bills to pay. So quick sponsor break, and then we'll talk about Lakebed. Building apps with AI is really easy now. I've been blown away with what GPT-5.5 is capable of until I tried building for mobile. As great as it is at web, I could not get a good mobile app out of it, no matter how hard I tried. It did everything wrong, from things that wouldn't build, to crazy UI layouts that made no sense, to letterboxing the entire UI into a tiny square in the middle of the screen for some reason. I actually couldn't believe how bad the mobile development was until I put it in a real good code base that was architected correctly to work in. I want to be really clear here, though. I'm not saying you shouldn't use AI to build mobile apps. I'm saying they need a really good starting point, a code base that makes sense, guidelines that will help them steer in the right direction, and a team that gets it. That's what Infinite Red is. They are the team that understands mobile, especially React Native, better than almost anyone I've ever talked to. These guys will come in and set you up right. They can take an old app and modernize it. They can help you start from scratch with an entirely new project. They can help onboard your team to do mobile development correctly. But most importantly, they can help get your code bases agent ready so that your mobile apps will work well with AI. Having seen some of the worst Swift code in the world thanks to GPT-5.5, having a team like this ready to help smooth it out is essential. That's why everyone from Zoom to Amazon to Starbucks has worked with them to try and polish up their mobile apps. I love this quote from Max. There is no substitute for experience in getting the idioms of React Native and avoiding the numerous dark alleys around state management, performance tuning, and third-party module selection. Our team at Infinite Red has provided this throughout the project. React Native can absolutely be used for great apps, but only if you have the right starting point. Build better apps with a better team at soidev.link/infinitered. It's time to talk a little bit about Lakebed. I want to be clear, Lakebed's not real yet, it's not out yet, but it's a good lens to understand these things through. There are two truths we need to agree upon before going further in this conversation makes sense. Truth one is that agents are better at writing code than they are at navigating bad dashboards. I hope we can all agree on this. Whether or not you like AI code, I don't care. They're pretty decent at it. But when it comes to actually navigating a dashboard like Cloudflare or GCP to go configure things for you, nope, not great. Hopefully we all agree on that. But now we need this second truth. There's a lot of big projects that were not worth building before AI. There's two aspects to this one. The first aspect is that the reasons to build these things before AI were not as big because the benefits to a dev not having to leave their editor are smaller than an agent not having to traverse the network and do screen capture and try to click buttons for you. When a human just had to command tab from VS Code over to the browser to click a couple buttons, it wasn't too big a deal. I hated it. I always hated that. It's a big part of why I like platforms like Vercel. I liked doing everything through code. So there was much less incentive to do this when devs just had to tab out of their editor. There's more incentive now that AI is going to struggle a lot more to do that. But the bigger reason, and this is the super controversial one, it's time to boil the ocean. The phrase "don't boil the ocean" is always meant to indicate that there are some things that are just too big to be worth doing, and it's not worth putting the effort in because it's silly and excessive. Suddenly, it makes sense to shave the yak. It makes sense to boil the ocean because agents can do the tedious bullshit. Projects that didn't make sense because they were too big before suddenly make way more sense. So a project as bold as rebuilding all of the features Cloudflare offers in a new SDK that is hidden to your agents so they can just call it the way they call anything in a TypeScript project would not have made a lot of sense before. Now that we have both this new customer, which is agents, that benefit greatly from these workloads, as well as the ability to write way more code than ever using agents, the incentive to build something like that has to integrate with everything ever has gone up a ton. But you can go further. And I can't believe I'm saying this to VoidZero, the company that literally built everything that we rely on nowadays with Vite, Vite Plus, Vitest, Rolldown, OXC, and Evan Yu, the creator of Vue and the whole Vue ecosystem. Like, for those people to be told they're not getting bold enough is insane and stupid, but I don't mind being insane and stupid. So let me be insane and stupid for a minute. Because Lakebed is all of these things. To be clear, I am leaning on existing solutions for a lot of them. Like my CSS library, for now, is just Tailwind using the Tailwind CDN host. I'm going to centralize that in the future, but I haven't yet. The framework is a very light fork of Preact. I'm probably going to fork it more heavily in the future. The bundler right now is ESBuild, but that's going to be the thing I target the most aggressively. I'm already starting to make some changes there. The CDN compute and database are all shims on top of other solutions too, but that could change at any point. The reason I'm building this isn't because I think CDNs are bad and need to be reinvented. It's because I want a abstraction, a layer, an SDK, so to speak, where everything can be done by an agent in a project without having to run a CLI or npm install 100 fucking things. And that's why I built Lakebed. This is hard to explain. It's much easier to just show, so I'm going to just show. I'm running the command npx lakebed new. I'm going to make a new project. We're going to call it if only, because if only the cloud was this easy to use. Just ran. Now the project exists. We'll CDN. And I want to be clear before I do this next step. I don't have anything special configured on this machine. This would work in a stock node box in the cloud with no auth or anything. npx lakebed deploy. This is now a real app that is live with a real database backing it, real auth that works. And of course, you guys know me, sync works too. I am what I am. People already coming in from chat. This is a real project that you can do whatever you want to with queries, mutations, endpoints, all defined with a standard syntax, not too dissimilar from what was built by our friends over at Convex, obviously very inspired by Convex. Where things get much cooler is when you start working with an agent on a Lakebed project. So here I'm going to tell Cursor Agent on Composer fast because I want this to happen quickly. Make this app a real Kanban with a live chat that shows users' names. When done, deploy with npx lakebed deploy. The command is now running. I'm going to go back to the browser, and this is all going to be real time. Not only is this going to build the full Kanban, it's also going to update the live deployment when it's done running. 404 not found? Oh no. Might have to make my docs a little easier for the agents to understand. It should have everything it needs in the agent MD. Last time I did this demo, this happened in like under a minute. So to be clear, the slow part is the agent editing it. But it looks like it's deploying now. Oh, I have to give it permission to delete files. Cool. And in just a moment, and now it's live. I didn't refresh or do anything. I just had to hit enter there. And now I have a full working Kanban where I can move cards around live and others see it. You see people already spamming Rickroll in the comments section. The fact that I could build this with a dumb, cheap model like Composer 2.5 in literally seconds, and it auto deploys and updates when the change goes live, is just so cool. And this is what I'm talking about when I talk about like a new end-to-end cloud. Instead of having to npm install a bunch of shit, configure things in dashboards, set up auth, and do all that stuff, you just tell the agent, go build the thing, and it can just go build the thing. If you provide it with the right tools and primitives, and they look and feel enough like what the agents already know how to build with, which, spoiler, TypeScript and Vite are things agents are very good at building. It's not hard to do. Okay, it's tedious to do. I put a lot of effort into building this project, but it is so cool. And it's so obvious to me now that I've built this, that this is where most software is going to go in the future. Not specifically Lakebed, but solutions like this will be on platforms like Lakebed, because it's so powerful to give your agent everything it needs to unblock itself and build the things it wants to build. And that's what VoidZero was doing. They already built the tools agents love. Now they have to build the platform that agents love to deploy on. And all of a sudden, Vercel isn't the company I'm scared of with Lakebed. It's Cloudflare. Kind of crazy to think when you look here that Vercel isn't the company to be scared of anymore, but they haven't figured out the database side at all. They haven't figured out how to enable agents to do those things yet. They're trying, and they might, but Cloudflare just purchased the ability to go so much further left from some of the best in the industry to ever do it. Individually, I was not afraid of VoidZero, and I certainly wasn't afraid of Cloudflare, because VoidZero didn't have a cloud. They were building deeply on Cloudflare, and Cloudflare didn't understand these DX problems well enough to do it right either. Now they're in an incredible spot. And if they end up buying Convex, I might just give up and shut down, because that's the last piece of the puzzle. Getting the relationship between the database and the client right will always be difficult. And as great as VoidZero is, it doesn't solve that yet. I built a lot of that layer. That's a big part of the focus that I've put into Lakebed, is making the sync and the data layer as reliable as possible. So I'm excited to see what ends up happening there. But at the very least, I am pumped to know Cloudflare's DX will get better enough that if you are building on Cloudflare anyways, you won't need something like Lakebed. Couple more things before we wrap up, because this is all important. Cloudflare confirmed that they are committing $1 million to a Vite ecosystem fund to support maintainers and contributors, administered by the Vite core team. That is really cool to hear, because there's a lot of people working on Vite that aren't part of VoidZero or Cloudflare. So making sure they're getting paid too is huge. That's a great addition to this acquisition. But most importantly, we can see why this acquisition happened here. The amount of adoption of the Cloudflare Vite plugin. Because as soon as this existed and was reliable enough that people, and more importantly, agents could use it, deploying on Cloudflare became much easier. And that's a huge portion of Cloudflare's new deployments, I'm sure. They call it everything I said before about how AI is changing how we write software, because of course it is. That's obvious now. AI loves building with Vite apps because Vite is fast, well understood, well documented, compatible with everything. And that's why they started building all the other pieces like faster builds, tests, linting, etc. And as Vite becomes full stack, Cloudflare is the place it makes sense for that backend to be. It is pretty obvious to me that the VoidZero guys were kind of fishing for this opportunity, because making a profitable platform in cloud, especially with the number of incredible engineers that VoidZero employed, is difficult. By building entirely on Cloudflare, they set themselves up perfectly for an acquisition like this. Got the insight that there was a cool piece about the new Cloudflare CLI at the bottom here, and that's right. Like, as someone who appreciates but has a lot of frustrations with Wrangler, the idea of a single package that is built on top of Vite as a CLI experience that lets you do everything you need to on Cloudflare is super compelling. CF Dev, which is a superset of Vite Dev that works with all the services, CF Build, which understands Vite projects natively, and CF Deploy, which makes it easy to deploy on Cloudflare. This is very promising. That said, the end here still shows the old commands. If you want to try Vite on Cloudflare, run npm create Vite at latest and then npx wrangler deploy. That's the part that needs to be fixed. We're getting there though. I am very hopeful for where they're going. The future for Cloudflare just got much, much brighter. I cannot imagine a better acquisition they could make for positioning themselves in this rapidly changing market, especially after the Nuxt guys ended up at Vercel. Very interesting to see the Vue ecosystem kind of split between these companies, where Nuxt went to Vercel and VoidZero went to Cloudflare. But this war is only getting started, and I have a feeling things are going to ramp up a lot over the next few years. And if you're looking for a place to keep up with that, you're there. So hit that red button if you haven't yet. Appreciate it a ton. I'm excited to see where this all goes, and I'm also excited to get a little bit more of what we're doing with Lakebed out for y'all to see. Let me know how y'all feel, and let me know where you think Tanstack's going to end up next, because obviously that's where things are going. I don't have any inside info here, just sharing what I know and what I can. Hope this was helpful, and until next time, peace nerds.